Thanks for visiting the patient and the weather today. I'm meteorologist Al Peterlin. I'd like to talk about the weather health risk for February 2nd, 2026. We do keep additional graphics available at tpatw.com, and we maintain a patient weather storefront on Amazon. Amazon purchases made through our patient weather storefront support the activities of patient weather. Looking at the service map for February 2nd, you can see we do have a new surge of cold air trying to work its way into Minnesota. There is high pressure really covering much of the nation. There is some moisture flowing back into the Pacific Northwest, and this pseudo-warm front here is showing that for much of the central, eastern, and southern portions of the nation, there will be a bit of a warm-up, but that warm-up means just trying to get back to normal temperatures. Looking at the vitality index, it's just a composite of all of those elements of weather that do have an impact on human health. And you can see we have a little bit of action going on in the Pacific Northwest, a lot of activity up here in the upper Great Lakes, a significant amount of activity across the south and southeast, and then a little bit of unsettled weather still in the Ohio Valley. And finally, you can see that large winter storm pushing away from the northeast, but still having an impact from New Jersey clear on up into New England. Looking at pressure change. Rising pressure. Rising pressure will be the key from Vancouver across the Pacific Northwest. That's Washington State, Idaho into Montana. Rising pressure here over Minnesota and Wisconsin, and rising pressure here along the coast with that fleeing winter storm. But this time the rising pressure all the way from eastern North Carolina, across Virginia into Maryland, eastern Pennsylvania, and really hanging on across most of New England. Note we have some falling pressure, and that is new moisture going to be streaming into Texas, Oklahoma, and into the southern plains, and that's just because of moisture flowing about the Gulf and on into the middle sections of the country. Looking at temperature change, and this looks a lot better than you would think. However, we do see that new surge of cold air trying to come down into Minnesota. And while this looks like a wonderful warm-up from Texas clear on up into the middle Mississippi and Ohio valleys, what it's really doing is trying to lift those temperatures back to more normal areas. However, there is, for every 10-degree change in temperatures, even temperatures rising, there is an increased risk of migraine. Looking at dew point temperatures, again, you can see that surge of dew points up the southern plains on into the Mississippi Valley and Ohio Valley, and you can see that falling of dew point temperatures here up in the Minnesota area. Vapor pressure, it's just supporting much of the same activity. Now we'll drop to the change in atmospheric oxygen, and you can see we have that risk of migraine from Vancouver across Washington, a little bit of spotty across Idaho into Montana and Wyoming. But we have a more significant risk of migraine here in the Upper Lakes from eastern North Dakota across Minnesota, down into Iowa and into Wisconsin and over the Michigan Upper Peninsula. Note here we have that risk of migraine where that low is retreating, and that runs all the way from eastern Pennsylvania on into Connecticut, Massachusetts, and really through much of the coastal areas of New England, but really extending on in through the entire state of Maine. Note, however, the risk of asthma and arthritis really for much of the heartland, all the way from eastern New Mexico across Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, and on up into the Ohio Valley. But the most extensive area and risk of asthma arthritis here in eastern Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, and then jumping on up into Indiana, Ohio, and southern Michigan. Thanks for visiting the patient and the weather. Your comments are appreciated, and if you hurt, tell us where you're located.